Generally, when I hear students talk about events, they talk about event planning. However, there's so many other aspects to the events world, which we've been talking about so far. Event coordinating, the event execution, setup, takedown, designing, decorating, implementing, bidding process. Another area or avenue you can consider is working for the venue itself. So if you work for the venue itself, you might bring in external planners, or you might have employees that are designated as planners for the venue. You might be a part of the sales and marketing team, you might be part of the negotiations team, or you might be part of the execution team. So when you start looking for those opportunities to work into events, think about working for a venue. And so the first venue I want to really consider is, rather than looking at the standalone venues, which are designed solely for the purpose of hosting events, I would also like you to consider working at a hotel. So a hotel, depending on the kind of space they will have, they may have an entire department dedicated to their events teams that has everything in between, from sales and marketing to the event coordination to the planner to negotiations to the actual execution of the event. And again, that's going to depend on the kind of space they have. So some of the space that they might be able to sell are not only the meeting space, like you see here, a functional meeting space, like a ballroom, but it could also include pre-event space, boardrooms, or breakout rooms. So I know most hotels have some sort of meeting space, even if they don't do necessarily special events, they might do meetings. And some of those rooms are even convertible to bedrooms. So you have board meeting rooms that are also bedroom attached, so that someone could stay there and also hold meetings in that space. So it's a multifunctional space. And so you could sell meetings and events from that capacity. You can also sell public spaces for events. So someone maybe wants to rent out the pool, or they want to rent out an atrium or a lobby or a bar space. You can also be part of that process. The big thing about hotels is looking at how much storage space you have in order to hold all the necessary equipment you need to really run that event, which also comes into, you might be working with a lot of third-party vendors to bring in things like DJ, lighting, AV equipment, etc. And you can see example here, the Four Seasons Miami, an event they set up in their space for a holiday celebration. Now, if you're working with hotels and working in hotel negotiations, some of the things that you would consider if you were from the sales and marketing side and you were doing negotiations, even potentially the planning and coordination side, to determine the budget for your event and what that looks like, is you're going to negotiate whether or not they have hotel rooms attached to their special event, how many hotel rooms, what the room rate is going to cost, the price of F&B, how much they have to order. So maybe they don't have to rent out the boardroom, but they have to order a certain amount of catering and events. There's a number of different ways to determine how you want to build that negotiation together for the meeting space cost. Do you have internal AV and technology costs that are associated with setup that you're going to charge them for, or are you going to require third-party vendors? Do they pay for parking and transportation? Is that included in the package? And any other hotel services that are included. So that is one way to get into events, is to actually work with a hotel team. When you also consider social business in hotels, you may have an event that's coming in solely for the purpose of the event and does not have coordinated room nights. Typically, those are going to be your life event things, or maybe galas. And you might have a list of required vendors that they use. So you create partnerships with third-party vendors to work in your space that you know you can trust. And that way you can also ensure that the person who's buying the contract for this event has a good experience, because despite the fact that they may be working with third-party vendors, your hotel is going to be branded with the success of the event. So you want to make sure you're working with professionals regardless of price. So you might say you have to use these preferred vendors if you want to use our hotel space, especially when you have no room nights attached to your event. Another place you can work is for convention centers. So they tend to be much larger than hotels. They have a lot of square footage. They're going to have very, very large spaces for big time events that they can also break into smaller event spaces and hold multiple events at the same time. Typically, convention centers have no sleeping rooms, and interestingly enough, most convention centers are owned by the city in some capacity. So, if you're really interested in tourism, you might be part of a convention center where your goal is to bring outside events to your city for the purpose of helping the destination and all the tourism and hospitality industry partners that you have around the area. You might have hotels attached to your convention center, which you actually see here. You're going to see there's a convention center attached to a Hilton. And so the Hilton is going to be a private organization, but the convention center is government run, owned, and operated. And you can work from that side where maybe you're working the marketing and sales side, maybe you're coordinating with your events teams, the CVBs and the DMOs that work with other events companies to do RFPs, requests for proposals, to get people to come in and actually organize events that are happening on the grounds of the convention center. So when you are doing negotiations for convention centers, typically you're going to, since you don't have those room nights and some of those other fees that are associated, you're going to look at how much space they want to utilize, and based on that space, how much are you going to pay per use of that space, how much pre-event space they need, how much setup space they need, the kinds of equipment that they're going to require for you to set up, and then also you're going to, just like the hotels, have those preferred vendors that you're willing to work with within the convention center to make sure that you have not only the best event, but that you have someone who is safe working in these big industrial environments. Next is a conference center. So a conference center is very similar to a convention center, except they tend to be smaller. A lot of times they are attached to hotels. You'll have a hotel and conference center. They tend to be more privately owned rather than publicly owned. Again, part of being smaller, private organizations can own them. So a lot of hotels will be this hotel and conference center that's attached to it, as opposed to a hotel that typically has much less space. If they have a dedicated conference center, they can have a separate entrance for that conference center. They can bring people in specifically for that event without necessarily attaching it to room nights. You're going to see the same kinds of selling points, having specialized meeting rooms, pre-event spaces, doing refreshments, and what everything looks like in between. And you can see an example of a conference center attached to the Madrid Marriott in this video here. So for negotiations within conference centers, you're looking, of course, at that meeting space cost, but you're back to really looking at how much F&B they're going to be incorporating. At a convention center, you're typically not going to have your own F&B catering team. You're going to bring in external vendors. But if you're part of a hotel that has a culinary team and F&B team, then you're going to be much more interested in making sure that they order from the F&B menu that you have on site for the hotel or for the private business. Looking at AV and technology options, if you are a conference center, typically you're going to have your own AV and technology teams where a hotel might not, instead of having only exclusively outside vendors, because that's a lot of money lost in the process of not including it within your own space. And you want to look at the full meeting package. So if you want to book a meeting here, the pricing strategy includes all of these different elements put together, as opposed to doing it piecemeal where you're ordering specific things from a menu. Then you have private clubs. So we've talked a lot about clubs and club ownerships. A lot of private clubs will host events for their members or people connected to their membership. Those include those social events, but it could also include corporate and business events. And how you pay and structure for private clubs is really going to depend on the membership, because most of your private clubs are not for profit. The fees are typically there to cover the fee cost, and the space is there for specific use by membership. So you don't want to have a lot of outside people coming in and utilizing space that members should have access to at all times. So again, if you want to work in events, you can work for a club as part of their events team. Maybe it is scheduling children's events. Maybe it's summer camps. Maybe it's sporting events, like golf classics. Maybe it is fundraisers or galas or special events that are social events. So you could be part of an events team instead of working for a hotel, convention center, conference center. You could work for the events team within a private club itself. Cruise ships is another thing a lot of people don't think of as kind of alternative event space. But cruise ships, whether it's the entire cruise ship or it's just you host meetings on the cruise ship or you have a conference on the cruise ship, where it's basically a hybrid of having a conference center and a full-scale resort. but people are there, they're part of the ship, and therefore they're kind of this audience that isn't going to go anywhere. There's plenty of meeting space, there's theaters, there's F&B options, availability of children's programs to do childcare during the day while they're at their conference functions. And this looks a lot like a conference center, but on the water with some of the extra amenities added in. And so you could work for a cruise ship company designing events on cruise ships in order to try to get typically more corporate business than anything else, but to get business on the cruise ships. Some other special use facilities that can also be used for events. Again, think about your special events, your mega events, your festivals, and everything in between. So theaters, amphitheaters, I know back before movie theaters really got out of fashion, movie theaters are really starting to get into, hey, host your event here. We have the space for it. We have the screen for it. It could be a really cool experience. Stadiums and sports facilities, colleges and universities have facilities. In fact, we have our entire events team here at MTSU that is responsible for organizing events and bringing in outside people to pay money to host an event on campus. Retreat facilities, and then of course your unusual things like theme parks, zoos, aircraft carriers, museums, anything in between. You can have an event at any one of these facilities. So maybe you're an outside consultant firm that looks for unusual event facilities to help facilitate a once-in-a-lifetime event for different people looking for really unique and special experiences.